One of the most common questions I get asked is, when is the best time to see cherry blossoms in Japan? As with anything that involves nature, timing can be tricky, but over the years of filming cherry blossoms, I've developed ways to make sure that my trips always land on full bloom dates. My name is Mizhelle, you're watching Tokyo Past 3, and these are my top tips for catching cherry blossoms in Japan. Make sure you stick around for tip number 5 because that's my tried and tested, surefire way of catching sakura. Let's begin. Tip number 1, be familiar with different types of cherry blossoms. When people say cherry blossom season, they are usually referring to the Somei Yoshino variety because they're the most common in Japan. They bloom around late March to early April, and the most popular attractions have rows of these trees that make them look dreamy. Other than Somei Yoshino, however, there are varieties that bloom at different times. For example, there's Kawazu Sakura, which are pinker and have bigger petals than Somei Yoshino, and they reach full bloom around the end of February. Yaezakura, cherry blossoms that have more than 5 petals, bloom in late April. Then there's also Shibazakura, which is technically isn't a type of cherry blossom but has a name because it resembles it. They're moss phlox that bloom around mid-April to mid-May. With all these different varieties, you may want to adjust the dates of your trip depending on the type of cherry blossom that you want to see. Keep in mind that Somei Yoshino is peak season, so expect popular attractions to be very crowded. Which brings me to tip number 2, check the annual cherry blossom forecast. The blooming of cherry blossoms is an anticipated event in Japan, and even for locals, they can be difficult to catch without proper planning, which is why the annual forecast from the Japan Meteorological Corporation is very handy. Big media companies like Live Japan and Japan Guide usually translate this into English. However, there are some details that you need to pay attention to when you look at these things. Let's take this map from Live Japan as an example. As you may have noticed, there are different dates for different prefectures. In general, temperatures rise earlier in the south, so cherry blossoms also bloom earlier in this part of Japan. Visually, you can imagine it as cherry blossoms making their way to the north with Hokkaido as the last stop. If you're trying to catch autumn leaves, the direction would be the opposite, so it's from north to south. Another thing that you need to pay attention to when looking at a map like this are the 2 dates for each prefecture. The first date is the first bloom, which means some flowers may be open but the rest of them are going to be buds. Your target date should be the second date, which is the full bloom date. Or if you're after Sakura Fubuki, which is the phenomenon of sakura petals dancing in the wind as they fall off branches, go after the full bloom date. What I usually do when I'm planning cherry blossom trips outside of Tokyo is that I put buffer days before and after the supposed full bloom date so that it's sandwiched in between. That way, whatever happens, I have other days to make up for it. Tip number 3, pick the exact places you want to see. The blooming days of cherry blossom trees can be different within the same prefecture. Heck, I've even seen cherry blossom trees bloom at different times within the same park. That's why you should never really take someone's word for it when they say, you should come to Tokyo now, it's blooming everywhere. Like, which part of Tokyo are you talking about? It could be blooming at one station, but not the other. This is where research is important. You want to see pretty things? You gotta do your homework, baby. The Tokyo Past 3 website has many of the popular cherry blossom spots in Tokyo covered. I update this painstakingly every year and the link is down below. If you want to see what's in other areas and their forecast dates, I would recommend either the Walker Plus page for cherry blossoms or the equivalent at Jorudan's. These are Japanese websites, but you can just run them on Google Translate to have the English translations. Personally, I tend to go for places where I know I can ride things like boats, rickshaws, and trains. If I'm doing a hanami picnic with friends, then I would find places that have food stalls because I can just buy and not prepare my own food. I'm lazy like that. Once you've got your destinations picked out, it's easier to get more accurate blooming dates. It's also easier to plan your photos because you have other people's photos for reference. Tip number 4, check live cameras. One other benefit of having a specific destination picked out is that you can check their official websites for live cameras. Some places like Chidorigafuchi in Tokyo and Hitomi Senbon Zakura in Miyagi have live cameras that show exact blooming states of cherry blossoms. There's also a website called Cametan, which is a listing of live camera links for different cherry blossom spots all over Japan. And I've placed the link below, but go there later because you can't leave this video without tip number 5, the most important one, which is check Google Maps. I know it sounds so simple, but I swear this is what I rely on the most. Before I go anywhere to film, I go on Google Maps, I check the photos and sort it by latest. That way I have an idea of what the place looks like, even without a live camera. I don't know about other countries, but Google Maps in Japan, pretty reliable. Even in the most far-flung places, there's someone out there updating stuff, including me because I'm a level 6 Google Maps local guy. Yeah! What a flex. In fact, I find that most, if not all of my failed trips could have been avoided had I looked at Google Maps sooner. For example, had I looked at it before going to Hakone Shrine during the 2-day winter trip to Hakone video, I would have known that the Hakone Shrine is actually closed at that time. Had I looked at it before going all the way to Yamagata in the middle of nowhere to find a dog shrine, I'd have known that the dog photos weren't there anymore. So now every time I plan a trip, cherry blossoms or not, I always make it a point to check Google Maps. Such a simple thing that takes seconds to do saves so much time, money, and energy. When you're checking cherry blossom photos, there are a few clues that tell you how much longer they'll be there. It takes around 10 days from flowering for sakura to fall, and at its early stage, the center should be green. Once the center has become a prominent red, then those petals are about to fall to give way to green leaves. Obviously, if you see green shoots coming out already, then you've already missed full bloom, but it would be a good time to capture sakura petals as they fall gracefully with the wind. If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because flowers are a plant's reproductive parts. And for us female humans, how do we know that our egg cells have died? That's right, we also go red. There, I just ruined cherry blossoms for you. Imagine if human reproductive parts also fell like flowers. That would be a horror movie. Ew. And those are my top 5 tips for catching cherry blossoms in Japan. I hope you found them useful in planning your next trip. If you want to see all the beautiful cherry blossom destinations that I've filmed throughout the years, check this playlist. If you're coming to Tokyo and want to see less crowded cherry blossom spots, then check out this video. This has been Mizhelle for Tokyo Pass 3. I'll see you in the next one. Bye! It's done. It's done. It's done. It's done. It's done.